It's go time.
Nathan Rourke is back in the CFL. Nathan Rourke signs with the British Columbia Lions. A rare tie Thursday night in Ottawa leaves both the Red Blacks and Saskatchewan out of most tiebreakers. The Command Centre takes a lot of heat for its involvement in the end of the Ottawa-Saskatchewan overtime game. A report from Dave Naylor of TSN indicates the Edmonton Elks will be sold to local businessperson Larry Thompson. Welcome to Third Down Gamble, with your hosts Don Charbin, Heath Graham, and Andrew Hoskins.
It's finally over. Nathan Rourke is back in the Canadian Football League. With that, we are now looking forward to what the BC Lions do next as they reintroduce their star quarterback who was blazing trails and setting records in 2022.
I'm a little bit surprised to see him back this season, but not surprised to see him back in the CFL as a whole. I was reasonably sure that he was going to pursue all aspects of the NFL prior to coming back. We know he had now seen time with 4 teams in the NFL, most recently the Atlanta Falcons, who cut him loose after 10 days with the team, and a 3-year contract for the BC Lions. That is huge for them.
The Lions did not want to close that door. Amar Damon has been fantastic at understanding what it takes and has certainly been very upfront about his desire to have him back. And Rourke himself, to be fair, has also indicated that he did not want to be anywhere else but Vancouver if he re-signed in the CFL. The latest experiment was down in Atlanta. He had been waived by New York. He went through all 32. He got a free agent offer with the Falcons. He played that fourth quarter and did not look great, and for the Falcons, they said, well, thanks, but no thanks. When he clears waivers again, and nobody's come knocking for a second time this season, it's time to start looking north and find the place where you want to be. There it is. The British Columbia Lions are back in the mix. 3-year deal. That's a commitment from the team and from him to each other.
It is, and the New York Football Giants, not the Jets. That was the New York-based team he had a brief stint with as well. The 3 years is huge. Like you said, it's a huge commitment by both the Lions and Nathan Rourke. We don't know the details of the contract, likely because of the salary cap restraints of this season. It won't be for a lot of money in 2024, and he's only going to be there for half the season as well. 2025 and 26, I would not be surprised if he's the top paid player in the league. That's money that, from what we've seen from Nathan Rourke in the CFL so far, is a worthwhile investment, likely the path that the Lions are going. We just said kind of 3-year deal with Rourke.
Most likely Rourke will be in the upper echelon of salary. How they prorate this through 2024 remains to be seen. Of course, the biggest question now, beyond the fact that Rourke is back, is what happens to Vernon Adams Jr. Now, back on February 21st, Adams Jr. signed a 3-year extension with the BC Lions, so he's on that same 3-year deal. Immediately, Rick Campbell came out and said, nobody's being traded, nobody's moving. But that's just giving Rourke time to settle in and let that quarterback room kind of find its way. I don't know for a fact that that will remain the case.
I'm not sure how it can, really. Vernon Adams is making decent money as a starting quarterback in the CFL. I don't know that they can afford to pay 2 starting quarterback salaries moving forward and keep some of that receiving core together that has been very successful for them. Something's got to give. We don't know the extent of Vernon Adams' leg injury. This might give them a chance to move him to the 6-game injured list. That changes things up a little bit and will allow Rourke to get in and maybe a little bit more money his way. That remains to be seen. We know Rourke will be in British Columbia for Wednesday's practice. How quickly he gets into game action in BC remains to be seen. He is going into a familiar setting with a familiar head coach, so it might not be too big of a learning curve. I don't know that he's going to be ready to go for this weekend.
He's also got an offensive coordinator in Jordan McSimic, who was there when he was there the last time. That's a rare luxury in professional football anywhere. With McSimic, he already understands what the cues are in the offense, the terminology, so that won't take long for him to get up to speed. I doubt that we'll see him start in this weekend's action, but it wouldn't be a surprise if he's dressed and maybe listed as the backup. And if Jake Dolegala struggles, you may see Rourke immediately thrust back into action. He would probably like to get back on the field and play again.
You're right, and that's a likely scenario, especially given that Rourke is in game shape. He's been going through NFL training camps and has seen some preseason action there. We know it often takes players some time to get up to speed. A little bit of a change in the game and the timing from NFL to CFL football, but a very familiar situation he's coming back to. I do worry about Vernon Adams Jr. in this whole situation, where that leaves him. And the season he was having, to see him go down with a leg injury and now Rourke to come back, is really putting a damper on what was shaping up to be a special season by VA.
Vernon Adams Jr., of course, was out in front when Johnny Manziel came through. That really put Vernon Adams in a weird place at that time. Then, of course, his head coach gets released in Montreal, and he is then subsequently released from the Alouettes, and he winds up going west. The Lions, to be fair, it would be great if they could have both he and Rourke in the stable. The problem is salary cap. If Adams Jr. is making north of $350 or $400, likely as well we're going to see the same dollar value, if not more, for Nathan Rourke. Now, the Lions could go over the cap this year and take the punishment if they want to, especially if it's a bid for a Grey Cup. What I am concerned about for Vernon Adams Jr. is, let's play this out. Rourke establishes himself as the starter through the rest of this season and leads the team right through to the Grey Cup, or even gets them to the West Final. Even though we saw that Vernon Adams Jr. started extremely strong, he did falter in the 2 games prior to including the injury game. Now, where would he go anyway in this league? Where does he wind up if, let's say, the Lions are set on a situation where they've got Dolegala and Rourke? Where would Vernon Adams go? I don't see another team looking for him.
The only one that even has any kind of possibility in my mind is the Calgary Stampeders. We know Jake Maier has had several games at the helm. He's stayed healthy, and that's the one thing we can say about him compared to every other starting quarterback in the CFL over the last couple of seasons, is Jake Maier has started every game. The success for the Calgary Stampeders in the win-loss column isn't up to their standards, so that would be one consideration that I could see. Beyond that, and we'll talk more about some other quarterback situations throughout this podcast. There may be a couple other places to squeeze them in, but not for the money I think that Vernon Adams Jr. should earn in this league.
That will probably play out next spring when the Lions have to address their salary cap. At some point, somebody's going to be squeezed, and if it is Vernon Adams Jr., it would not surprise me, but in the same breath, wow, you can almost be the MOP and yet not make the team the next season. Another quarterback that has been released that has Canadian ties is Casey Bauman. He is a quarterback that signed as an FA with the LA Chargers. They released him today as well. He is 6', 229. He had played for Augustana University, a Division II program in Sioux Falls in South Dakota. He would likely be a person that if he falls through waivers, the CFL may take a look at. I'm not sure who, if anyone, has him on their negotiation list.
Unfortunately, with the negotiation list, teams release about 10 names a season, so we don't get to see all of them. We know quarterbacks are sought after and dominate some of these negotiation lists in the CFL. There's been a lot of success getting quarterbacks from smaller schools. Getting another young quarterback up into the CFL is a great thing, and we'll continue to keep an eye on it to see what happens.
Well, he's got the Canadian pedigree coming through his mother's side, even though he grew up in the United States, but he does qualify for Canadian citizenship through his mother, Kelly. This is another opportunity for having another Canadian quarterback, not unlike Nathan Rourke and his status, to come to the CFL and make a name for himself. And this is the thing. Nathan Rourke, by signing with the Lions, put out there that, yes, this is a place that you can play, you can make a name for yourself, you can make some money, and you can do some great things. This is a stamp of approval. The league, among a lot of players down south, is not a second-rate, oh my goodness, do I have to? It's that's another opportunity for me if this doesn't work out.
It is, and I think that's really developed over the last few years as well. There's been a lot of positive talk about the CFL as an option to go to. There have been times, certainly, where it's been a struggle, or where a guy finds out from his agent that Saskatchewan or Winnipeg is interested in him, and they have no idea where those places even are on a map. And you know, it's funny. Chris Streveler even comes to mind in that situation when Winnipeg expressed interest in him. He didn't know where it was, and then he looked at the map and realized he had to go out of his university dorm, head north, and drive straight, and ended up in Winnipeg. To have more of this momentum and to get guys that have NFL experience or NFL looks getting back up here is a great boost for the game.
The Edmonton Elks look like they have a new owner. Now, this would be the first time in their franchise history in their newest iteration that started in 1948. The Elks, according to a report from Dave Naylor from Tuesday morning, have agreed to sell to Larry Thompson, a huge construction business operator in the Edmonton area, who had sold his entity a year ago and now is looking to set up as the new owner of the Edmonton Elks. Formal announcement will probably be Thursday of this week.
We'll wait for the confirmation, but it's indicating strongly that Larry Thompson will be the new owner. One thing that stood out to me in reading the brief information we have is he's a longtime Elks season ticket holder as well, not just coming in from the business perspective, but from a fan perspective as well. And that's something that hopefully will help drive the fan interest in Edmonton. We know attendance has waned a bit over the last couple of seasons as they've struggled on the field as well. To get this new injection of excitement and to have a passionate fan as an owner of the team, I think will help bring back some of that passion and some of that excitement for the crowd in Edmonton.
2 straight wins will start getting people excited. And of course, Trey Ford, who was injured in that last game, likely isn't long-term, is huge for that franchise. And this is where, if you're Larry Thompson coming into this situation, yeah, you're a long-time season ticket holder. You've seen it all. Now that you're willing to take on this enterprise, remember, the Elks have lost millions of dollars, likely in excess of $16 million since the pandemic, or including the pandemic. That is money that the team has absorbed as losses. That's not necessarily a debt that he's going to acquire. This gives him a kind of a fresh footing. And it hasn't been stated exactly when the transition will take place. There will be a formal announcement Thursday. They may announce that at the end of the season it will become his team. They may announce within the week it may become his team.
A lot of questions still to be answered in there. The one thing that stands out for me is, if I'm Larry Thompson, one of my first conversations as owner is going to be with Trey Ford. If indeed he wants him to remain a part of the Elks organization, we know Ford's contract is up at the end of this season. There would be a lot of other teams interested in his services. So if that's a guy that you feel you need to market behind, you need to get in a room with him very soon and sort that out and hopefully sign him long term.
That is going to be huge. Depending on who you talk to from Edmonton, there are those that think that this is more than an audition for Trey Ford to be the starting quarterback in Edmonton. It may be an audition to look into the free agent market and specifically move east, where his home is. Others have argued that no, this is his opportunity to make a name for himself in Edmonton and make this happen. if you're Larry Thompson, you've got to look at this situation. You got to really sort of assess for yourself. Is this the direction I want to go? Because he's coming in with a ground zero sort of approach. We start here. Where do we go? If he wants Trey Ford, you're going to have to do something about that soon because he will be an FA come February. For the Elks, though, beyond that, it is a marked change from community-based ownership to single-person ownership of the franchise. That leaves only 2 franchises in the CFL, one in the NFL, that are community-based operated. That being in the NFL, the Green Bay Packers. In the CFL, it's the Winnipeg Blue Bombers and the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Winnipeg flirted with private ownership a decade ago.
They did, and it remains to be seen how long the community-owned teams can continue to function as is. I was a little bit surprised to see Edmonton go the direction of private ownership, but digging into it a little bit more, it's not a huge effect, I think, on the team or the organization day-to-day operations. It's a matter of boardrooms and that kind of things. A big move. I think Edmonton needed the shakeup, and this is an opportunity for them to turn things around and start going in the other direction.
They had 20 non-disclosure agreements signed with prospective buyers. They did their due diligence with the 5 people that were charged with going through and reviewing everything. They had some riders attached to a contract agreement that they would sign stating these are the particulars that we have to have. Obviously, Thompson agreed to all of that, and they were satisfied too that he has the wherewithal to withstand, because most likely the Elks, unless something really goes insane this year and they go on a huge winning streak, won't be seeing 25,000 people a game in the stands just yet. But if you give them something to look forward to, and that's where the winning streak right now is helping, next year, hope starts anew.
I'm Derek Taylor, the voice of the Bombers on 680 CJOB, and I listen to the Third Down Gamble podcast.
The Command Centre has taken some heat again for what happened in a football game. Now, the week prior, it appeared, though, that they had missed a call with a fumble. This week, it becomes much more involved in the end of the overtime game between the Saskatchewan Roughriders and the Ottawa Redblacks, a game that ultimately ends in a tie, the first tie in the CFL since 2017. Ironically, on opening night of that season, it was the Stampeders and the Ottawa Redblacks in that same stadium going through overtime and remaining in a tie. The takeaways that some people have is that roughing the passer interpretations by the booth maybe missed the mark.
Before I jump into that, I just want to mention quickly there was another missed fumble call that was booth reviewed this week as well, and that was in the Calgary-Toronto game. Unfortunately for Cam Judge, the play was whistled dead. He did immediately recover, which was the finding of the Command Centre review. However, had the whistle not blown and they let that play out, Cam Judge was going to be at least in the Argonauts' red zone, if not the Argonauts' end zone by the time that one played out. So a tough one for Cam Judge and the Calgary Stampeders. Moving back to this current topic of Saskatchewan and Ottawa, roughing the passer is black and white right now as far as the contact low on quarterbacks. And that was the situation in this one that they saw on the review where Dustin Crum was ruled into, resulting in the roughing the passer call. I don't know if it's right, but it's the way it's written and that's the way it was interpreted.
The argument from the side that didn't like the call is that Zacoby McLean was cut blocked by Raquel Armstead into Dustin Crum. And where I will argue on the other side is that as McLean is coming forward, yes, Armstead does cut him. I'd love to see cut blocks eliminated altogether in the league. I think they're dangerous to begin with. His momentum, McLean's, is still directed at the quarterback. According to the league interpretation of that, you're responsible for how you get there and where you make contact. The booth applied that interpretation correctly. Remember, earlier in the game, defensive lineman, Saskatchewan Roughriders Miles Brown, went around the edge and was tripped up accidentally by Darius Bladdock. He fell into the leg of Drew Brown, which injures Drew Brown. Now, on the field, Tim Croker makes the call that it was roughing the passer because he caught him below the knee. Nothing different. Again, a guy is falling forward into the lower leg of a quarterback. In the case of the overtime, it wasn't called in the field. Now, Jim Barker on the TSN panel went off on Tim Croker saying, why didn't you make the call? But if you look at Tim Croker and where he's positioned on the play, he's looking through 2 or 3 people trying to see the quarterback. There's a lot of humanity surrounding that area. So that Croker missed it, I don't have a problem with. But the booth got it right. They have to protect the quarterback. I don't care if Dustin Crum was in the locker room thinking the game was over. That's irrelevant. What maybe needs to be done is the booth's got to buzz down and say, hold the phone, we're reviewing this, and get everybody before they start walking away.
That was the mistake of the officials on the field as well. The play resulted in a turnover on downs or a fumble recovered by the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Any turnover is reviewed by the booth as well. That announcement needs to be made at that time. You're 100% correct on that one. Interestingly, in this short overtime that we had, both teams thought they'd won the game. Both teams thought they'd lost the game. So maybe the tie is the appropriate result when it's all said and done.
Well, the other big moment in the mini games that are overtime was Saskatchewan was 3rd and 5 at the Ottawa 20, and Shea Patterson throws a ball to Sean Bain. Red Blacks defensive back Elijah McGee gets his left arm in the way of the ball and deflects it and breaks up the pass. Rough Riders rightly, they can challenge. It's done. And they do get the call. Now, you see on replay that he gets to Sean Bain's back. He hits him in the back. Maybe a quarter of a second too early before he makes contact with the football. I have a real problem with that challenge. I'm not saying that the Rough Riders are wrong in making it. I have a problem with the challenge in the first place. I think what needs to be eliminated is any coach's challenge with respect trying to get pass interference. That has to be eliminated.
What stood out to me on this play was it was not unlike one that was reviewed and not deemed pass interference a couple of weeks ago, where Nick Dembski was interfered with. Very similar situation, a very similar looking play. So what I need is consistency from the booth. Transparency as well. I think that's one of the biggest things that's lacking right now, is getting the understanding of what they saw and why they upheld a call or why they overturned a call. Fans across the league are getting frustrated. The Command Centre has injected itself into the outcomes of several games this season, and there doesn't seem to be any urgency by the league to clarify what and why. And I think that's a big mistake when you've got a league that depends on fans in stands to generate the revenue for this league.
I'm going to take issue with that. The fans can scream all they want. That's their prerogative. That doesn't mean that they're not going to show up. That just means that they're upset. If I'm upset over something that happens on the field, it doesn't mean I'm not going to show up the next home game. I will say to all of that, yes, the league maybe needs to clean some things up. You're talking about a situation where you think technology is ruling the day, but it's not. It's a personal interpretation of what is being seen. And the person who makes a call on one night may not be the person that makes the call the next night. So you have an internal bias to begin with, where you have different people making those interpretations. Maybe the league needs a consistent set of people in the booth where that's the only people there, and maybe they need a red light green light type of system where they've got 3 people reviewing it. If 2 green light it, then okay, it's overturned. If 2 red light it, then no, it's not overturned, and have sort of a that vote go on. Because right now it seems like you've got, and I'm not totally clear on this, but it looks like you've got some helpers that are looking for things, and then one person who makes the arbitration at the end.
Yeah, and that's what I mean by the consistency as well. You're 100% correct. Is we have different people in charge of the booth in different games, different weeks. When they first brought in video review, Jake Ireland, who was a legendary CFL official, was the guy doing the reviews and making those determinations. Now we've got several people doing that. And to be completely consistent, I don't expect one guy to be in the booth for every single game throughout the entirety of the season. But have 2 head guys, and they can alternate games. but at least then you know who it is. They can work together to come up with more stringent regulations of what they're looking for to overturn a call or to uphold a call. And that's what I feel is lacking, is that consistency, that transparency of what they saw. And if they start making those explanations, and it's not just the fans that are upset, it's the players, it's the coaches that are upset by some of these calls as well. When you start to look into it a little bit more and you have that communication coming from the officials, that can help smooth some waters and get people back into accepting the call as opposed to just being frustrated the entire time.
But the frustration comes from what? And this is what I'm going to bring back. Did the booth get the call wrong? In my mind, no. They got it right. Maybe the sequence of events as to how the whole enterprise was handled on the field was something that needs to be cleaned up. But did they get it right in the end? Yes, they did. It was roughing the passer or a pass interference under the current interpretations that the league lives with. That's the way it goes. We had, before the booth, we had all kinds of screaming and yelling over missed calls or calls that people thought were phantom or whatever the case may be. This is part of sport. You have this sort of chaos that goes on, and it's part of the minutia of the game.
Did they get the James Tuck fumble and immediate recovery right?
They got... This is the... I don't know why you asked that, because we've already dealt with that.
Because you're saying the booth was right. It seems like you're going down the line of the booth is always right.
No, I just said the booth was right in this circumstance. I'm not saying that they're right every time. That's a big difference. I started this whole thing that people are making interpretations based on what they see, whether it's video or live. What's the difference? It's still an interpretation. Tom Valesi was up in the booth that night. He's the one that made that call. So I don't say that they're perfect. They get things wrong, but that's part of life. If nobody makes a mistake, the games get pretty boring.
You were really defending the booth, and it sounded like you were just defending the booth overall.
I would rather have the booth than not, because there's so much more that they do that we don't even know. And so to argue that the booth needs to be eradicated, to me, is unfair and unjustified. The booth does a lot of stuff that we have no clue that they're involved in, because it's so quick and so helpful to the team on the field. And the best one that I can point to is whether or not a person was in the end zone or apprehended to be in the end zone, because there's so many times when on the field they don't really know. Do agree with you. I wish the officials on the field, especially when there could be a fumble or whatever it is, keep the whistle away from your mouth. Just let them play out. And I know Cameron Judge could have been probably down at the Toronto 40 or 30 yard line. Frustrating, but those things happen when you get quick whistles.
And I'm not advocating to get rid of the booth by any means either. Let me be clear. That's not the direction I want to see it go either. I just want consistency and transparency.
At the end of that Saskatchewan game, and holy cow, did we have everything happening in Ottawa. Bob Dice got into a bit of a fracas with a person that was not authorized to be at the Ottawa bench. Now, in that moment, the person is accused of making some derogatory statements, and Dice was confronting him, saying, "What are you doing here? Do you have the authority to be here?" Defending his team. Even a couple of Saskatchewan Rough Riders went over to help out. It looked like the fight was between the Riders and the Red Blacks. No, the Riders were actually helping out. Mitchell Picton being one that made his way over there to help out the Red Blacks in this very precarious situation. What is an unauthorized person doing at the Red Blacks bench? That's not the Red Blacks personnel that have to take care of that. That's the stadium.
It is, and I think there's more to this story that may come out. It may not ever come out. One of the unique situations with a lot of the stadiums in the East is that both teams are on the same sideline.
And in BC.
In this situation, there's a little bit of a no man's land between the two teams. Indications from 3 Down Nation are that this person was affiliated with somebody that works for the league, but should not be engaging with any player or any team personnel on either team, and overstepped that and somehow became involved in a verbal altercation with the Red Blacks. They need to address that. The credentials and the areas of where credentialed personnel can be needs to be very clearly marked. This should not happen. I would be very surprised if it happens again. I think the league will learn from this and put things in place to make sure that there isn't this kind of interference.
The league will do what it can to help this out. They do have their personnel between the benches so that nothing happens between the two benches. Bob Dice, who is a big Papa Bear, he defends his people, and he was not going to let his players be accosted by anybody. So he took it upon himself to create that line to protect them. And he then went to the league and said, look, you got to fix this. Part of the confusion at that time, remember, was that everyone thought the game was over. It was a family night. People were coming down onto the field. That had nothing to do with that. This was something apart from that.
And all props to Bob Dice for protecting his players and his personnel. Security breaches in any sport are scary situations when you don't know what that person is doing, where they came from. And that can be as simple as somebody running out on the field and running around the goalposts. They maybe in their mind don't think they're causing any harm, but it's a threat and it's an unknown. And that's what needs to be eliminated, is to make sure that there are not these unknowns that put undue stress on players and coaches. For this guy's own safety as well, getting into an altercation with a team of professional athletes is not the smartest thing to do either. Whatever the situation was, he could have come into harm by being in the wrong place and acting inappropriately.
Well, he's seen it happen before where fans have come onto the field, and especially more so in hockey, where they've been tackled. And courts have found that you had no business being there in the first place. Whatever happened to you is a result of your own doings. And they found that consistently, both north of the border, south of the border. There is a line dividing the player from the fan, and neither shall go either way. We saw how the league dealt with the Argonauts when they got into it with the fans in Toronto after a playoff game. We saw what happened in Detroit after a basketball game one year with Ron Artest. We've seen it with the Boston Bruins in New York one time. Once you cross that line, you don't know what's going to happen. It's Pandora's box. That's why that line has to be so secure. Bo Levi Mitchell, a night not to remember in Montreal. This time, after 3 series, Bo is benched. If you remember back to the playoff game last year in Montreal, the East semifinal, he only got in for the last 6.5 minutes of the football game. What does that speak to in Hamilton with respect to Bo Levi Mitchell?
I'm a little bit curious why Scott Milanovic gave him the start if he was going to have him on that short of a leash. Bo's numbers were actually all 4 passes that he threw were caught. Unfortunately, one of them was caught by the opposition. He went 3 for 4 on passing and an interception. Was pulled for Taylor Powell. I don't know that this looks promising for the future of Bo Levi Mitchell in Hamilton. It's a weird situation, not dissimilar to what happened to him in Calgary, realistically. He's leading the league in passing yards right now, but maybe benched for the rest of the season, and it's Taylor Powell's turn to lead the Ticats. He's got also the league lead in touchdowns, but interceptions as well, and I think that's the biggest thing right now in Scott Milanovic's mind, is eliminating the mistakes, the turnovers, and we'll see what happens the rest of the way, but I would be very surprised if Taylor Powell doesn't get the next 4 or 5 starts.
Darnell Sankey makes an interception on a great play by Sankey, and right after that, that's the end of Bo's tenure in Montreal for the night. I'm wondering, and this is just pure speculation on my part, you've got 2 very strong-willed people. You've got Scott Milanovic, you've got Bo Levi Mitchell. And I wonder if something was said back and forth between them as he came off the field or as they were reviewing the play. Scott Milanovic will not tolerate failure anymore because his team right now is hurting for wins. They had a nice little bump of a 2-game winning streak. That's over. They've got to put it together. Taylor Powell gave them some life. They went down and scored touchdowns. But in the 2 games that Bo had against Montreal, he really looked lost in the first one in Hamilton. And after the interception, I think Milanovic had seen enough. He wasn't going to provide what the offense needed.
And all Taylor Powell did in relief was throw for 300 yards and 2 touchdowns. So you can see why Milanovic and the Ticats are maybe leaning that direction. And we'll see what happens. I mean, Powell could come in and struggle in the next 3 starts. throw 2 picks and a fumble in each of those games, and then they're right back to square one. But from what we saw from Taylor Powell right now, he's fired up and wants that opportunity to lead. He had some success last year as well. I think that it's an opportunity that the Ticats need to look at and give him that chance.
Do you not think, given what Taylor Powell had put down on paper last year and on film, that he deserved to be the starting quarterback this year? It kind of surprised me that the Tiger Cats went the route of Mitchell. And was it a case of, well, we've got this guy, we're paying him big bucks, he did take a salary cut to help us out, we owe it to him, and he had the big game in Edmonton, and then he comes down to earth against Montreal again?
I think that's a very strong case of what happened here. But not unlike the Edmonton Elks, how long do you give them that chance? And we saw Edmonton continue to trot McLeod Bethel Thompson out there. The yards passing were there, but the wins weren't coming. And this is a very similar thing in Hamilton. Putting up yards, not getting wins. Give the young guy a chance.
Third down.
Ottawa kicks off Week 11 on Thursday night with a visit to the Calgary Stampeders. The Stampeders at home are 3.5-point favorites. The Stamps undefeated at home, winless on the road. What do you make of that?
McMahon Stadium is a tough place for the opposition to play, is what I make from that so far. This game is really piquing my interest because we are going to get Jeremiah Mazzoli back on the field as the starting quarterback for the Ottawa Red Blacks. Great to see him back. I hope that he is healthy and maintains his health. It'd be wonderful to see him go out on his own terms and not out on injury. With the change in quarterback, I can see why the Stampeders are favored with their home record as well. It will be really fun to watch what Mazzoli does with that offense. But I will take the Stampeders at home and to cover the spread in this one. I think there's a little bit of that challenge for the Red Black. Offensively, they struggled against Saskatchewan at home. I know the weather was bad and that contributed as well. This is a game that Calgary needs to maintain their place in the West because things are really tightening up.
Red Blacks against Saskatchewan combined between Drew Brown, who was knocked out of the game, and Dustin Crum, who came in to rally them. 27 of 41 for 266. Saskatchewan was 30 of 49 for 299 in a rain-swept game where at times it was torrential downpours. It was amazing they could throw a football, let alone put up any numbers. I was a little surprised that Dustin Crum wasn't going to be the starter in Calgary, that Mazzoli was. I look at Ottawa. Ryko Armstead has to be better than what he was against Saskatchewan. The Stampeders, will they get Dedrick Mills back? He's got a situation at home that he's dealing with. Their receiving core is starting to prove itself. Jake Mayer is starting to move in the pocket. Their defensive line is coming around. They're starting to pad their numbers with sacks. This is kind of a real saw-off in terms of talent. I just don't know, and I'm with you, I don't know if Mazzoli's got enough rust off of his arm that he can lead this team to a victory against a team that hasn't lost at home.
The league-leading Montreal Alouettes head to Saskatchewan to take on the West-leading Saskatchewan Roughriders. The road team, the Alouettes, are a 0.5 favorite at Mosaic Stadium.
I'm surprised that the Alouettes are only 0.5 favorites. That's, to me, is a pick'em game. Now, we've heard that Trevor Harris is back practicing with the Saskatchewan Roughriders. I don't, in my mind, don't believe that he needs to be on the field to play the Alouettes. Shea Patterson has played them. He kind of knows what they're about this season. I hope that the Roughriders don't use Trevor Harris in this game because he's going to be rusty, and I don't see what's going to be a benefit. Now, question marks for the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Who's going to be running the rock? And this is huge for them because they've got injuries to their running backs, some major, some minor. How does that play out? It was interesting against Ottawa. It seemed like all the Rough Rider points were scored in the last 3 minutes of the half or in overtime. They didn't worry about the other 54.
There's also a rumor that Cody Fajardo might be back at the helm for the Montreal Alouettes in this one. So a really interesting quarterback situation heating up. We could see the battle of the backups. We could see one team coming back with their starter and not the other. We could see both number one guys back. That's a lot of variables to consider to pick a winner in this one. I'm going to give the nod to the Alouettes. They have been dominant this season. And if it's Patterson, I think the Alouettes defense gives him a pretty hard time. I'll take Montreal on the road, and it's only a 0.5. So obviously if they're winning, they're covering that spread.
I've heard mixed messages about Cody Fajardo, whether or not he will be there or won't. Put him on the 6th game. Leave him on the 6th game. Just deal with it, because Davis Alexander is not hurting you being your quarterback. Part of this equation that we haven't touched upon is that Alouettes defense. They are the best in the league. Whether or not Shea Patterson and the Saskatchewan offense or Trevor Harris and the Saskatchewan offense can figure them out is a problem unto itself. I like the Alouettes on the road. Saskatchewan's going to give them a fight, but I don't think they have enough. Saturday night, it's the Edmonton Elks against the Hamilton Tiger Cats. 2 teams with 2 wins. One team coming off of 2 wins in a row, the other with 2 losses in a row against the Alouettes. Last time they met, of course, Tiger Cats put up big numbers against the Elks. Can they do it again? The Elks are 1.5-point favorites going in to this football game.
The Edmonton Elks on a 2-win streak with a bullet. They're favored on the road, which is virtually unheard of as well. I think Hamilton is a team in turmoil right now. Had you asked me a couple of weeks ago, I probably would have given the nod to the Ticats at home. But we saw some quarterback controversy, some friction there between Milanovic and Levi Mitchell. The Elks are trending the right way. They've got some momentum. They've got some excitement back. We don't know the status of Trey Ford yet at the time of this recording. It didn't look super serious on the sidelines. He did a lot of stretching. He was in uniform for the rest of the game last week. That bodes well. I think that momentum continues for the Elks. I'm going to take them to go into Hamilton and get the win.
Both sides need their best performers on the field. There's no time to allow for someone to get an extra week to get ready. They have to be ready if they need them. And if Trey Ford is close to being ready, he will be the starter in Hamilton. Taylor Powell, I really like him as a quarterback. I think he is the future of the Hamilton Tiger Cats. It's interesting because a lot of people argue that the guy that could be starting for Edmonton, Trey Ford, is the future of the Hamilton Tiger Cats. We'll see. I'm not convinced that the Elks can do it 3 times in a row, especially a road date in Hamilton. The Tiger Cats looked bad for 6 quarters against the Montreal Alouettes until Powell got out there and started. Granted, it was after beatdown, if you want to call it that, but he still made the Alouettes worry. I like him. I think that he's going to be a spark for this Hamilton offense, and I'm going to take the Ticats to get inside the cover and maybe even win this football game.
Closing out the week in Vancouver, they've opened the Upper Bowl for this one at BC Stadium. The Blue Bombers are in town and are 3.5-point road favorites. What are your thoughts? Who are you taking in this one?
When is Winnipeg not the favorite? Can Winnipeg win on the road? This is the one question mark that they haven't figured out. The Bombers have looked far better, especially defensively, in their last few games. However, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers have not won a game on road soil yet. The BC Lions are a tough foe at home, and maybe, just maybe, there's a Nathan Rourke, number 12, rolling out onto the field to play in that football game. Jake Dolegala gave up a pretty good performance in the first half against Edmonton, but once things started to go off the rails, his numbers fell. Dolegala, of course, that was his first start in that offense. He'll be better. It's going to be a dynamite football game. The excitement's going to be there.
A fun fact when you ask when Winnipeg isn't the favorite, it was 2 weeks ago at home against these same BC Lions. So the road teams are the favorites in both of these ones. I believe that has a lot more to do with Vernon Adams Jr. being injured than anything that Winnipeg has done. Now, they are coming off a bye. They're going to be rested. This is a huge game for both of these teams. The Lions are fighting with the Rough Riders for first place. The Bombers can't afford to drop further behind and have a streaking Edmonton Elks team catch them. This is going to be a fun game, and I think the advantage for Winnipeg is their secondary this year has been a nice surprise, and Jake Dolegala is not a guy that's going to beat you with his feet. If we see Nathan Rourke, that may throw everything out the window, but right now I do like Winnipeg to win. It might be a last-second field goal, so I think BC beats the spread.
Winnipeg winning is a tough one. BC beating the spread, I think, is more where I'm going to go. I just want to see from Winnipeg what that offense is going to do on the road. It's night and day between what they produce at home in Winnipeg and what they produce on the road. The Lions, of course, last time they played them were shut out and had 4 first downs, something that team hadn't done since 1954.
And that 4 first downs was with Vernon Adams Jr. at the helm for 3/4 of the game as well. Jake Dolagala is a different quarterback, so that could be... He could have a lot to prove, as could the entire BC Lions team. I know they didn't like getting that 0 hung on them on the road, and they're going to be making darn sure that it's not the same result in BC.
My question is, will they be composed through this process? Because they were embarrassed in Winnipeg. Will they contain themselves and just focus? I kind of like the Bombers to win this one. Maybe. This is so tough. To me, Winnipeg could just blow them right out. BC's in disarray right now. But Nathan Rourke is there, and that throws everything out the window.
Third Down Gamble uses the expert resources of the Canadian Football League and 3 Down Nation. For up-to-date, insightful statistics and analysis, please visit cfl.ca and 3downnation.com. The CFL on CBC theme music is used with written permission from the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation.
Thank you for listening to our show. Third Down Gamble is hosted on Podbean. Follow us on Twitter, where our handle is @ThirdDownGamble. Join us again next time. The Third Down Gamble podcast. Audio worth watching.